In November of 2022, the cryptocurrency exchange FTX froze withdrawals and declared bankruptcy, causing billions of dollars of losses for millions of customers around the world. Over the next couple months, FTX's founder Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF, was holed up in the Bahamas giving numerous interviews, both to the mainstream media outlets and to Twitter Spaces. He categorically denied all wrongdoing, and blamed pretty much everyone except himself. We covered this topic extensively last year, and I've linked previous videos in the description below if you want more background on the FTX collapse. In today's video, we'll be focusing on what happened after he was arrested in December of 2022, as a lot of new revelations have come out. He was extradited to the US, where he now faces interrelated charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit both wire and securities fraud, and violation of campaign finance laws. The charges allege that he stole customer money from FTX, deceived his creditors and investors, and used stolen customer funds to make political campaign contributions, as well as many other uses. He faces a maximum sentence of 115 years. He posted a $250 million bail bond and pleaded not guilty on all counts. His trial is expected to begin in October of 2023. While on bail, he resided in his parents' San Francisco mansion. Since then, a lot of new developments have come to light, so we'll go through them in chronological order. Following the collapse of FTX, SBF claimed that he lost almost everything. Substantially all of his previous net worth were his ownership of Alameda and FTX, which are now worthless. He had some other assets, including a stake in the brokerage company Robinhood, but these were all frozen. In his public interviews, he said that he had less than $100,000 in his bank account. This makes it surprising that he was able to post his $250 million bail in January of 2023. SBF's parents, Barbara Fried and Joseph Bankman, are professors at Stanford University and own a multi-million-dollar home in San Francisco. They posted their home as collateral for the bond. Two other Stanford professors, who were friends of SBF's parents, also co-signed the bail bond. They would technically be on the hook to pay the $250 million if SBF fails to show up in court. Of course, none of these people actually had $250 million, but this large bail amount was largely symbolic. SBF forfeited his passport and agreed to wear an ankle monitor. He was basically under house arrest, so the chances of fleeing were extremely low. With his trial scheduled for October, SBF had 10 months to prepare his legal defense, as well as to play League of Legends, which is one of his great hobbies. This probably would have been the best use of his time, as he won't be able to play any video games in federal prison. Here we need a quick refresher on the alleged fraud. FTX customers deposited money onto the exchange. With neither the consent nor knowledge of the customers, their funds were loaned to Alameda, a proprietary crypto hedge fund owned by Sam Bankman-Fried. His one-time girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, was the CEO of Alameda Research. As the owner of Alameda, SBF extracted hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars from Alameda Research, which he used to fund his lavish lifestyle as well as speculative investments. These investments include $500 million worth of Robinhood shares. This is wire fraud because the FTX customers were deceived into sending their money into FTX. They were told that their deposits would remain their property and FTX had no right to lend them out. Allegedly, the customer deposits were used as SBF's personal slush fund, and he used the money for whatever he wanted. SBF's main defense is that he was not operationally involved at Alameda Research since 2021, when he handed the reins over to Caroline Ellison to become CEO. He said that there was a glitch in their software, which allowed Alameda to extract billions of dollars worth of customer funds from FTX without his knowledge. He's effectively trying to shift the blame to Caroline Ellison. To the extent that Alameda was knowingly stealing money from FTX customers, it would be Ellison's fault, not his, because since 2021, he was no longer involved in decision-making at Alameda. SBF hired a law firm called Cohen & Gresser to lead his legal defense. Cohen & Gresser is a prestigious firm which has represented large corporations including Goldman Sachs and Samsung Electronics, as well as high-profile individuals including Ghislaine Maxwell. It's safe to assume their services aren't cheap. In December of 2022, SBF was scheduled to testify before the US Congress to explain what happened with the FTX collapse. He was unable to attend because he was arrested the day prior, but a transcript of his opening statement was leaked to the media. In his opening statement, SBF claimed that he had less than $100,000 left in his bank account, and he's not sure he'll be able to pay the legal fees he's likely to rack up. Not only that, but he's trying to divert whatever funds he can find away from paying lawyers and towards bringing value to FTX's customers. This begs the question, how is he now able to afford such a prestigious and presumably expensive law firm? According to a recent lawsuit filed by FTX's current liquidation team, his parents might be involved. SBF's dad, Joseph Bankman, was a professor at Stanford University where he taught tax law. SBF hired him as a senior advisor to FTX, where he helped them minimize their tax liabilities. Barbara Fried did not hold an official position at FTX, but she was involved in their political campaign contributions, which we'll discuss in more detail later. In early 2022, SBF allegedly gifted his parents $10 million, which came from Alameda, as well as a $16 million mansion in the Bahamas paid for by FTX. It is further alleged that SBF's parents are using this $10 million gift to pay for their son's legal expenses. Thus, SBF may be funding his defense with stolen money. In May of 2023, we got our first official glimpse of SBF's defense strategy, when Cohen and Gresser filed a motion seeking to dismiss many of the charges brought against him. This motion was rejected. A linchpin of their argument is that Mr. Bankman-Fried began transitioning away from Alameda when he founded FTX in 2019, and formally resigned and handed off control of Alameda in 2021. The argument is, to the extent that there was any fraud, it was at Alameda and SBF wasn't even involved. As we will see, there are some major problems with this story. Shortly after FTX collapsed, 3 members of SBF's inner circle pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against SBF in exchange for lenient sentencing. These include Gary Wang, his co-founder and chief technology officer, Nishad Singh, the former head of engineering, and Caroline Ellison, the CEO of Alameda Research. SBF's defense relies heavily on his claimed ignorance of what was going on at Alameda. Thus, Caroline Ellison, being the CEO of Alameda during the relevant period, is perhaps his biggest threat. In December of 2022, Ellison's guilty plea was made public. The following is a direct quote. From 2019 through 2022, I was aware that Alameda was provided access to a borrowing facility on FTX.com. I understood that FTX executives had implemented special settings on Alameda's FTX.com account that permitted Alameda to maintain negative balances in various fiat currencies and cryptocurrencies. In practical terms, this arrangement permitted Alameda access to unlimited lines of credit, without being required to post collateral, without having to pay interest on negative balances, and without being subject to margin calls or FTX.com's liquidation protocols. I understood that FTX would need to use customer funds to finance its loans to Alameda. I also understood that many FTX customers invested in crypto derivatives, and that most FTX customers did not expect that FTX would lend out their digital asset holdings and fiat currency deposits to Alameda in this fashion. I agreed with Mr. Bankman-Fried and others not to publicly disclose the true nature of the relationship between Alameda and FTX. I also understood that Mr. Bankman-Fried and others funded certain investments in amounts more than $10,000 with customer funds that FTX had lent to Alameda. The investments were done in the name of Alameda instead of FTX in order to conceal the source and nature of those funds. I am truly sorry for what I did. I knew that it was wrong, and I want to apologize for my actions to the affected customers of FTX." Unquote. This is clearly disastrous for SBF, as Caroline's confession directly implicates him. The only way he can get off is to convince a jury that Caroline is lying. While he was out on bail, he had numerous communications with reporters from the New York Times. He sent them Google documents which he claimed were diary entries written by Caroline Ellison. It's unclear how he had access to these documents. This culminated in an article published by the New York Times in July of 2023, which paints Caroline Ellison in a less than favorable light. In the diary, Caroline talked about her painful breakup with SBF, which made her feel like she wasn't good enough. Ellison said at one point that she cut off communication with SBF. In 2022, SBF started a second trading firm called Modulo. Caroline Ellison was jealous that SBF was giving more attention to Modulo instead of Alameda. It's clear what SBF was trying to do. He wanted to paint Caroline as a jealous ex-girlfriend desperate for his attention. Maybe this motivated her to steal the customer funds from FTX to make leveraged bets in an attempt to regain SBF's recognition. It's important to note that the alleged diary entries that SBF provided to the New York Times would be nearly impossible to independently verify. SBF could easily have written them himself. Attempting to manipulate public opinion of a witness is a big no-no when you're out on bail. In August, a federal judge revoked SBF's bail, so he will now reside in a New York jail cell until his trial begins in October. According to his lawyers, SBF isn't having a good time in jail. The jail is unable to accommodate his vegan diet, so he's been reduced to consuming only bread and water. The lack of access to League of Legends may also be taking a toll on his mental health. Just a few days after his bail was revoked, the government released a 70-page document which gives some key insights into their prosecution strategy. The crux of the prosecution's case revolves around the 3 former FTX and Alameda executives who agreed to testify against their former boss. Gary Wang and Nishad Singh will testify that they, at the direction of SBF, created features in FTX code which allowed him to secretly funnel customer funds to Alameda as well as other accounts. A lot of the prosecution's efforts are to establish SBF's criminal intent going back well before November of 2022. It wasn't just a few bad decisions that ended badly. Instead, from the very beginning, FTX was built on a foundation of deception and criminality, with its eventual collapse being inevitable. FTX's fraudulent activities date all the way back to its founding in 2019. FTX tried to open a bank account, but no bank wanted to hold customer funds for an unregulated crypto exchange because the risks would be too high. But Alameda already had a bank account, so in 2019 and 2020, FTX told customers to wire money directly to Alameda's bank account. The money they sent to Alameda was credited to their FTX account. In August of 2020, FTX created a shell company called North Dimension. They claimed North Dimension was a trading company that helped to execute trades on behalf of Alameda. Thus, North Dimension was able to open an account with an undisclosed bank, likely Silvergate. In reality, the North Dimension bank account served as FTX's de facto bank account. Customer funds that were originally sent to Alameda were transferred to North Dimension. Because the bank didn't know North Dimension was holding customer funds, the unusual money withdrawals didn't raise red flags. The whole thing was a house of cards. If a customer deposited money into their FTX account, they could look at the app and see their balance. But the money never even made it to FTX. It instead went to a shell company, which SBF could use as his personal piggy bank. This shows that even as early as 2020, SBF was defrauding the bank and was developing a sophisticated infrastructure that allowed him to essentially steal customer deposits. The flow of funds was intentionally convoluted to obscure the fact that he was stealing the money. So now SBF had access to billions of dollars of customer funds, which he could spend with impunity. All of his public statements about effective altruism can be completely discounted because he spared no expense to fund a lavish lifestyle for himself and his cronies. This included an estimated $300 million worth of luxury real estate across the Bahamas, where both he and other FTX employees resided. Included was a $16 million mansion that he gave to his parents, along with a $10 million cash gift. Another thing that he spent on was political campaign contributions. In public interviews and statements, SBF claimed that the goal of his donations was to promote pandemic prevention. According to the prosecution, this was a complete lie. The real reason was to burnish his own image and improve FTX's regulatory prospects. In an attempt to skirt campaign finance laws, SBF arranged for many of the donations to be made in the names of Nishad Singh and Ryan Salam, two high-ranking executives at FTX. Money from Alameda or FTX would be wired to these individuals, who would then make the campaign contributions in their own names. Not only did SBF defraud FTX's customers, he also defrauded Alameda's creditors. Alameda borrowed billions of dollars from crypto companies including Voyager Digital and BlockFi, both of which are now bankrupt. Alameda owned various cryptocurrencies and used these crypto holdings as collateral to borrow the money. It's no different than if you have a stock brokerage account and you use the value of your existing shares as collateral to access a margin loan from your broker. The difference is that Alameda was so big that they could single-handedly influence the market prices of the cryptocurrencies they owned. In particular, they bought large quantities of FTX's native FTT token, as well as another cryptocurrency called Serum. Alameda single-handedly pumped up the prices of these coins so they could access greater amounts of margin loans. This ultimately caused massive losses for their creditors, as the value of these coins quickly collapsed when Alameda imploded and had to fire sell its massive positions. As FTX was collapsing in November of 2022, instead of coming clean, SBF continued to lie. On November 10th, he tweeted that his number one priority by far is doing right by users. We now know that this wasn't true. His number one goal was saving his own skin. At the time, he was physically located in the Bahamas. Some people in the Bahamas used FTX, although this made up a tiny percentage of total customer deposits. Even with a massive hole in its balance sheet, FTX had enough money to honor all withdrawals from the Bahamas customers. Even though withdrawals were frozen for all other jurisdictions, FTX inexplicably reopened withdrawals for customers within the Bahamas. In December of 2022, shortly before his arrest, SBF agreed to a telephone interview with a citizen journalist named Tiffany Fong, which she uploaded to her YouTube channel. Lawyers generally advise their clients to avoid talking to the media while they are awaiting trial, as everything they say can and will be used against them. But in SBF's delusional narcissism, his desire to remain the center of attention trumped legal considerations. He told Tiffany Fong that he selectively reopened withdrawals for the Bahamas because that's where he was living, and he didn't want to be in a country with a lot of people angry with him. He was concerned about his own safety, and he possibly thought that if he made all Bahamas customers whole, the Bahamas police wouldn't arrest him. Of course, he was wrong. He was arrested by the Bahamas police and extradited to the US in short order. But this shows that even until the very end, he was lying. If doing right by customers was really his top priority, he wouldn't have selectively opened up withdrawals in the Bahamas at the expense of customers in all other jurisdictions. SBF cares about SBF and nobody else. Even after he was arrested and released on bail, SBF continued to lie. One of his biggest lies was that FTX US was solvent. He claimed that the issues were only at FTX.com, a non-US exchange. All FTX US customers could supposedly be made whole. He developed an elaborate conspiracy theory that FTX's liquidators halted withdrawals at FTX US purely to prolong the bankruptcy process and accumulate more fees for themselves. According to prosecutors, this was a lie. FTX US had a $45 million hole in its balance sheet. SBF directed Alameda to transfer money to FTX US to make FTX US solvent. He apparently thought that this would help him avoid prosecution in the US. Even if FTX US technically was solvent, at least some of this money was from FTX.com customers. Money from both FTX.com and FTX US were all commingled in the same slush fund. It'd be like if you robbed two banks for $1 million each, so you have $2 million of stolen money in total. You squander half of the money, so you only have $1 million left. You return the remaining $1 million to Bank A. You claim that Bank A has been made whole, so it should reopen and operate business as usual. But this is not true. The $1 million that you returned to Bank A was stolen money. You had no right to return that money to Bank A. Some of that money originally belonged to Bank B. Bank B may try to claw back some of these funds. Thus, you can't say that Bank A was made whole. But that's what SBF is trying to claim. He stole money from both FTX.com and FTX US. It doesn't matter if FTX US has enough cash to operate, because at least some of that money was allegedly stolen from FTX.com. It is thus necessary to freeze all of the assets of both FTX US and FTX.com until the courts can decide how to compensate the victims. And this is exactly what the liquidators did. The most damaging part of the prosecution's case will likely be the testimony from Caroline Ellison. Remember that SBF got his bail revoked by sharing what he claimed to be Ellison's diary with the New York Times. But Ellison herself gave her diary to the prosecutors, and it paints a very different picture. In her diary, she had a section labeled "Things Sam is freaking out about." Entries in this section related to Alameda's trading hedges, and bad press about the relationship between Alameda and FTX. This paints a picture that SBF was very involved in Alameda, to the extent that he was even keeping tabs on their trading hedges. This completely contradicts his public statements that he did not know what was going on. On November 9, 2022, right as FTX was collapsing, Caroline called a meeting of all Alameda employees. The government obtained a recording of the meeting, which was likely taken by one of the employees. In the recording, Ellison explained, quote, "Starting last year, Alameda was kind of borrowing a bunch of money via open-term loans and used that to make various illiquid investments. Then, with crypto being down, the crash, the credit crunch this year, most of Alameda's loans got called. And in order to, meet these loan recalls, we ended up borrowing a bunch of funds on FTX, which led to FTX having a shortfall in user funds," unquote. It seems that only a few members of SBF's inner circle knew about the fraud. The Alameda employees were shocked to hear that Alameda was borrowing FTX customer money. An Alameda employee asked Ellison who else was aware of the shortfall in FTX customer funds. Ellison responded, quote, "Yeah, I guess I talked about it with Sam, Nishad, and Gary," unquote. An employee then asked who made the decision to use FTX customer deposits to cover the shortfalls at Alameda. Ellison replied, quote, Sam, I guess," unquote, obviously referring to SBF. SBF's only possible defense would be that Caroline Ellison was lying. Maybe she borrowed the customer funds without his knowledge and was just blaming him after the fact. The problem is, immediately prior to Ellison's all-hands meeting, she sent a message to SBF asking him what to say. This shows a level of coordination between SBF and Ellison, which makes it almost impossible to believe that he wasn't involved. From a legal perspective, SBF's biggest mistake was giving so many public interviews and statements trying to explain himself. The prosecution was salivating as they watched these. They can see all of his arguments, and they have months before the trial to preemptively debunk all of his likely defenses. In many cases, the prosecution doesn't even need to craft counter-arguments. All they have to do is show the court that SBF's arguments are irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial. If so, the court won't even allow the jury to hear them. SBF has been digging his own grave before the trial even begins. In SBF's post-arrest Substack post, he points out that many other crypto companies, including OKEx, Coinflex, Voyager Digital, BlockFi, Celsius, and others have also failed. He likely hopes that he can trick the jury into thinking the collapse of FTX was the result of uncontrollable crypto forces as opposed to his own criminality. The prosecution is urging the court to exclude any references to alleged misconduct at other crypto companies, because these are irrelevant and would only act to confuse the jury. Another one of SBF's arguments is a conspiracy theory that FTX's law firm Sullivan and Cromwell pressured FTX to declare bankruptcy so that they could earn more legal fees even while FTX could still have been saved. Even if this were true, which it's not, this is completely irrelevant to the fraud charges against SBF. This is again an attempt to obfuscate and confuse the jury. Finally, SBF claims that he is a believer in effective altruism and his primary goal has never been personal enrichment. This is clearly a BS argument meant to gain sympathy and encourage jury nullification. Jury nullification means that the jury believes that you are guilty, but finds you innocent because they believe your crimes were somehow justified. When you steal money, it doesn't matter what you do with it. We also now know that FTX only ended up donating $30 million to charities, a tiny fraction of the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of luxury Bahamas real estate that he bought for himself, his family, and his cronies. In addition to his former inner circle testifying against him, SBF inadvertently gave a near confession in the days following the collapse. On November 16th, a journalist at Vox published text messages that she had with SBF. This gives us a rare glimpse into what he probably intended to be a private conversation. The journalist references a previous conversation that they had, where he said it's not worth it to do unethical things to make money. She then asks if all of his statements about being ethical was just a front. SBF responded, quote, "Yeah, I mean that's not all of it, but it's a lot," unquote. He's effectively admitting that he has no ethical consideration. His effective altruism was all just a facade. SBF tweeted that FTX never invests customer deposits. The journalist asked him if this was just BS. SBF admits that he was playing word games. Technically, FTX did not invest customer funds. They just lent it to Alameda, which in turn gambled the money. This shows malice aforethought. He knew exactly what was going on and intentionally misled FTX customers with his tweets. He then gives some interesting commentary about his two co-conspirators, Gary Wang and Nishad Singh. He said Gary is scared, presumably about his own legal liability. Nishad is ashamed and feels guilty about stealing customer funds. They all knew what was going on. It was no accident. Whether they were trying to save their own skins or truly felt remorse, all three co-conspirators have pleaded guilty. They undoubtedly negotiated lenient sentences in exchange for agreeing to testify against their former boss. They will have a chance to rebuild their lives upon their release. SBF, on the other hand, continued to lie, violated his bail terms in the most egregious way, and has never taken responsibility for his actions. These are all things that the judge will consider when deciding his sentence. With a maximum prison term of 115 years, SBF will regret his arrogance and stupidity for the rest of his life. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about SBF? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.